Welcome back to the deep dive. I'm so glad you're here because today we're going to try and dismantle a perception you might not even realize you're holding on to.
A big one.
It's huge. When you think of the Qur'an, what's the default setting in your brain? You probably think of a holy book, right?
Sure. Theology, prayer, the nature of God.
Exactly. And obviously the text is all of those things. But looking at the research we have in front of us today, specifically the Quranic Reformation and the religious mosaic of ancient Arabia, there is a completely different angle that gets overlooked.
Right.
What if we looked at this text not just as a sermon, but as a radical economic manifesto?
It's a perspective that really changes how you view the history of the 7th century. If you strictly box the Quran into theology, you miss the mechanism, you miss the engine of how it actually moved people.
That's what jumped out at me reading through these analyses. It feels less like a detached religious meditation and more like a scrappy startup movement trying to disrupt a very entrenched 1%.
I think that's exactly the right lens. To understand the rise of Islam, you can't just look at the prayers, you have to look at the money. You have to understand the social hierarchy it was threatening.
So that's the mission for today.
That's the mission. To explore how the Quran provided a unified legal and economic alternative to a system that was, according to these sources, deeply fragmented and, frankly, economically predatory.
Okay, let's do it. We are going to take a journey into a world of tribal tycoons, desert trade routes, and a revolution that hit the elites where it hurt the most.
Right in their wallets.
But first, we have to set the scene. I think there's this myth of uniformity when people think of pre-Islamic Arabia. The, cartoon version is just a bunch of people in the desert worshiping the same idols.
And the sources we have today completely dismantle that idea. The pre-Islamic landscape wasn't a monolith at all. It was a mosaic. It's so important to understand that Arabia back then was a place of massive religious diversity. It wasn't just one thing.
So if I'm traveling through the region at that time, I'm not seeing the same religion everywhere.
Not even close. Let's look at the scholarly breakdown, because the economics are tied directly to the religion. If you go south to what is now Yemen, you're looking at sophisticated, organized states.
Like kingdoms.
Actual kingdoms, yeah. Saba, Himyar, these weren't just nomads. These were agricultural societies dependent on some pretty high-tech irrigation.
High-tech for the 7th century, I'm guessing?
For sure. Massive dams, complex canal systems. And so the religion reflected that. They had state cults dedicated to astral deities, gods for the sun, the moon, Venus. You see names like Almaka or Aftar.
Why those gods specifically?
Because their survival literally depended on the rain and the harvest. Their gods were tied to the cycles of nature and the state's ability to manage water. It was almost bureaucratic.
Okay, so the South is organized, it's bureaucratic, star gods. What if I travel north?
The North, places like Petra and Palmyra, was a totally different vibe. Think of it as a cultural melting pot. Heavy Greco-Roman influence.
So a lot of mixing.
A lot of mixing. The sources describe a syncretic religion, so they're mashing up traditions. You might worship a god like Dushara, the lord of the mountain, but he's often identified with Zeus or Dionysus.
It's a remix culture. I'll take a little bit of Zeus, add a local mountain god, and see what happens.
Precisely. He was cosmopolitan.
Oh.
But then we get to the Hijaz, specifically Mecca. This is the focal point of our story. And the sources describe Mecca not as some great theological capital, but as a ritual marketplace.
A ritual marketplace. That sounds transactional.
It was all business. And this brings us to a really crucial concept, the term Jahiliyyah.
I know that one. It's usually translated as the age of ignorance.
Right, and that translation has colored how we see the era, as if the people were just uninformed. But the analysis here, especially from scholars like Toshihiko Izuzu, argues that ignorance is actually a mistranslation.
Oh, interesting.
The root word doesn't really imply a lack of knowledge. I mean, these people were master poets and savvy traders. They weren't ignorant.
So if it's not ignorance, what is it?
It's closer to impetuousness or even barbarism. It refers to a mindset, a specific psychological state of hot-headed tribal pride, which was known as Hamiyya.
Hamiyya. Okay, so what does that actually look like?
It's a world of decentralized chaos where might makes voice.
Right.
It wasn't that they didn't know things. It was that they refused to bow to any authority other than their own tribal bloodline. If you insulted their tribe, you didn't go to court. You went to war.
So it's a society driven by ego and honor.
Extremely. It was all about protecting your own group at the expense of everyone else.
Okay, so we've got this fragmented tribal Wild West, and Mecca is right in the middle of it.
Yes.
Which brings us back to the economics, because if Mecca was a ritual marketplace, somebody had to be running the register, so who is making the money?
This is where we need the oligarchy. The sources paint Mecca as a boomtown run by one tribe, the Quraysh. They were the 1%.
Or was their business model?
It was brilliant and pretty ruthless. They controlled the trade routes, sure, but more importantly, they controlled the pilgrimage traffic to the Kaaba.
Which housed all those different idols, like Hubal.
Correct. The idols were the draw. They brought the tribes in. But the Quraysh didn't just make money from tourism. The sources are clear they were heavily involved in high-interest lending.
Usury. Okay, now this is where it gets really interesting to me.
It's timeless, isn't it? And this is the context for the Quranic intervention. It doesn't just say, worship one God in a vacuum. It directly attacks this economic structure. One of the biggest reforms was the strict ban on riba, on usury.
Let's drill down on that. Why was banning interest such a huge deal? It wasn't just like a moral suggestion.
No, it was structural. You have to understand how riba works. It wasn't like a modern 5% mortgage. The elite used these predatory compounding loans to trap the poor and vulnerable in perpetual debt.
So how did the trap actually work?
It was often double or nothing. If you couldn't pay your debt on time, it doubled. If you still couldn't pay, well, you or your children could be enslaved to work it off.
Wow. So it was a mechanism for converting free people into property.
Exactly. It was the engine of inequality. It kept wealth concentrated at the very top. By banning riba, the Quran was cutting off a massive revenue stream for the elite and breaking the very tool they used to control the lower classes.
That is a direct hit to the bottom line. It's saying you can't use money to buy people anymore. And it didn't stop there, right? I was reading about zakat.
Right. So zakat is often translated as charity, but again, that kind of softens the blow. In the pre-Islamic system, charity was performative. It was about that hamiyya we talked about, showing off how powerful and generous you were. It was voluntary, and it was about the giver's ego.
A flex. Look at me, I'm so rich I can sprinkle gold on you.
Totally a flex.
Yeah.
The Quran comes in and institutionalizes it.
Mm-hmm.
It makes it a mandatory tax for social welfare. It's no longer about the giver's generosity. It's about the receiver's right.
That is a huge psychological shift.
It completely reframes the money as something that didn't really belong to the wealthy person in the first place. It belonged to the poor by divine decree. It takes the ego right out of it.
And the text is pretty tough on just hoarding wealth in general.
And scathing. The analysis points to Surah al-Humaza as a prime example. It condemns he who gathers wealth and counts it.
Counts it. That's such a specific image. It's like Scrooge McDuck swimming in his coins.
It completely flips the script on what success means. In the Meccan worldview, having the most money meant you were the most powerful. The Qur'an says, if you're just stacking cash while people are starving, you're not successful, you are spiritually bankrupt.
When you put it all together, attacking the loans, taxing the wealth, shaming the hoarders, it really does sound like class warfare.
It was absolutely perceived that way. The early resistance wasn't just about theology. The elite didn't really care if you worshipped a different god in private. They cared that this new message was threatening their financial dominance.
So the Qur'an wasn't just about tearing down their system. It was also about building a safety net. You can't just burn it down.
That is the key. You have to replace it. And this brings us to the political shift. The Qur'an moves society from being based on the tribe to being based on the ummah.
The community of believers.
Yes. In the old system, your protection depended entirely on your bloodline. If you were from a powerful tribe, you were safe. If you were an outcast, you had zero rights. The Quran replaced that biological loyalty with a super tribe based on shared belief and law.
And we have a document for this, right? The Constitution of Medina.
We do. It's a fascinating historical text that formalized this rupture. But if you want to see how this actually protected people, just look at how it treated orphans.
This stood out to me in the sources. The focus on orphans is intense. Why?
Well, there's a grim economic reason. In that tribal system, your value was often linked to your ability to fight. An orphan child has no sword arm. They are, in a brutal sense, dead weight.
That is harsh. So what would happen to them?
A guardian, maybe an uncle, would take over their inheritance. But there was no oversight. The sources describe how guardians would just consume the orphan's wealth, mix it with their own. And who's going to stop them?
Nobody. Because of that, might makes right mentality.
Exactly. But the Quranic law specifically criminalized this. The source material emphasizes that eating the wealth of orphans is described in terrifying terms, like eating fire into one's belly. It established strict legal protections.
It's taking the Wild West and introducing a sheriff.
A sheriff with divine authority. And this extends to women, the poor. It was a structural transition to a codified system of divine accountability where the weak have rights that the strong must respect.
So a massive disruption, a total shakeup. But did the Quran just throw everything away? Was it a total erase and replace of Arab culture?
No, and that's where the genius of the reform lies. It used a strategy of continuity and rupture.
Continuity and rupture. Okay, break that down for me.
Well, if you try to change everything all at once, people revolt, you lose them. The Quran was more like a remix. It took existing cultural forms and just updated the operating system.
So what stayed? What was the continuity part?
Look at the rituals. The Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca, was a pre-Islamic practice. The Quran didn't abolish it. It kept the circumambulation, the tawaf. It kept the procession between the hills.
It kept the hardware but changed the software.
That is a perfect analogy. It also kept certain values. We mentioned muruwwa earlier, hospitality, honor. The Quran didn't say stop being hospitable. It said do it for God, not for tribal showing off.
So the vessel remained Arab, but the content became Islamic.
Exactly.
So what was the rupture then? What got deleted?
The theology and the intent. The biggest rupture is the shift from a high God model to exclusive monotheism. Before, you might believe in Allah as a creator, but you had all these idols as intermediaries. The Quran said, no partners.
No middle management.
Exactly. Direct access. And this abolished the concept of intercession. You couldn't bribe an idol to talk to God for you. And this brings us back to economics with animal sacrifice.
Oh, right. Because in the old system, you sacrificed animals to feed the idols.
Yes. And often the meat was just left to rot or was consumed only by the elite. The Quran decouples sacrifice from feeding idols. It reframes it as an act of piety and charity.
So where did the meat go?
To the poor. The Quran explicitly states that the blood and flesh don't reach God. Only your piety does. So the animal is sacrificed, but the food is distributed to the hungry.
There it is again, the economic redistribution.
Always. The synthesis is that the Quran didn't just erase the culture, it systematically reoriented it. It took the familiar forms, but injected them with strictly monotheistic and ethical meaning.
It's really savvy when you think about it. You take something people are already doing, but you completely change why they're doing it.
And that is why it worked. If it had been completely alien, it might have been rejected. If it had been exactly the same, it wouldn't have changed anything. It walked that fine line.
So let's step back. We started by saying the Quran was more than a theology text. We've seen how it entered this fragmented, Wild West religious landscape and offered a unified system.
And a system that directly challenged the predatory economics of the Meccan 1%. It took on the usury, the hoarding, and the exploitation of the vulnerable.
Right. It wasn't just preaching about heaven, it was regulating the market on earth.
Ugh.
It offered a legal framework, the Ummah, that protected orphans and the poor in a way the tribal system just couldn't.
And it connects the spiritual directly to the social. You can't be good with God if you are exploiting people. That's the core message. The rights of the poor are not a favor you grant them. They're a divine mandate.
It raises a really provocative thought for me. We often think of reform as destroying the past. We think of burning it all down. But this suggests that real, lasting change happens differently.
I think that's the lesson here. Reforms don't succeed by just bulldozing history. They succeed by reinterpreting it. You take what people know, like a pilgrimage, and you change the why. You redirect the energy.
And that is how you build something that lasts for 1,400 years. That's a powerful place to leave it. If you found this breakdown fascinating, you're going to want to see the rest of the picture.
Absolutely. We've only scratched the surface here.
So make sure you check out the playlist to see the rest of the videos in this series. We've got more deep dives coming that break down the history and the reform of the ancient world. Thanks for listening.
We'll catch you on the next one.